I got interested in growing mineral-enriched veggies many years ago, so I've actually titled the talk Growing Minerally Complete Food. So about probably 20 years ago, I heard a guy, Dr. Joel Wallach, who was a vet in the US, and he concluded that animals that were in captivity always lived shorter lives than those in their natural environment. And he concluded that it was because of trace minerals and other minerals missing in their diet when they're in captivity. In my talk, I'll refer to a few books, and there's references on each of the slides as to where some of this information came from. So I studied horticulture at Gatton College, University of Queensland, 86 to 89. And the book that we got given was, for study in fourth year, was The Nature and Properties of Soils by Brady. So this is 9th edition. A friend told me probably 15, 20 years ago that the original of that, a earlier copy of that was The Nature and Properties of Soils, 7th edition. And there's some really good information in this book that you don't find in the 9th book that we were studying. And so when you look at what soils really should be, there's a lot more in this. It's basically been dumbed down, the 9th edition, is what I'm saying. All right. This book, Mineral Nutrition of Higher Plants, is by a guy, Horst Marschner, a German scientist. It's basically the Bible on plant nutrition, soils, and if you want some really deep stuff, this is the text to look into. I haven't used much out of this book for this talk, but in the last year I bought a book called Mineral Nutrition and Plant Diseases, because that's what I work in every day. And if your mineral nutrition is correct, you'll get less diseases. I have no doubt about that. Same as for humans, same as for animals. So that's a really easy to read book and very worthwhile to get hold of. I've got numbers on the slides as we go through, so that if you've got questions, can you hold them to the end? But I haven't got a number on every slide, but hopefully it'll give you some indication as to whether it is if you want to ask a question and refer back. So yeah, if we can do questions at the end, please. And yeah, just as a reminder, please do fill out that survey form because it helps them with doing this workshop. Thank you. Probably got to learn how to do this. All right, I've just got a couple of slides on raising seedlings because it's so important for getting good vigour and a good seedling, good plant. If you don't have good vigour in your seedlings, you don't get a good plant, you'll get less yield. A friend actually told me not so long ago that that she'd spent a couple of $100 on seeds and she got a really poor response. Well, I did about the same 20 years ago, and in hindsight, a lot of it came down to where the seed was actually produced. So the big vegetable seed companies, the grain seed companies, they'll actually grow their seeds, their seed nurseries on the western side of the Great Dividing Range because you've got lower humidity and lower temperature. Sorry, you might have higher temperature, but you have lower humidity. And what they do to work out... Sorry.
Because we are filming it as the same.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so a really key point is the addition of the two numbers. So if relative humidity was 95% on the eastern side of the range, on the coastal side, and the temperature was 30 degrees, they put the 95 and the 30 together, and they get a value of 125. That seed grown under those conditions won't be as good quality as seed grown where you've got a lower value of those in total. So if you've got 60% humidity over the range and 35 degrees Celsius, you've got a lower total number. And that's where you grow seed because it just, as it's developing, it's respiring less as it's growing. And it also comes down to storage as well. You want to store under low humidity and low temperature because it keeps the seed it's respiring less anyway, so it's less energy being put into it growing. So vigour is the key thing in getting good seed, and that's how you get it, by growing the seed in good conditions. I know it's nice to buy from an organic seed company or someone else you might think is really good, but you won't get the same quality of seed if it's not grown in the right conditions. So store it in a fridge, keep the temperature down, and you'll have a better chance of getting good results. So vigor's the number one thing for getting a good plant. I visited a big seedling nursery this week, and they actually said they'll pay extra money to get 98% emergence rates, just because it just makes everything so much easier. They don't have to seed extra, but it just is all about the plant vigor, plant health. So when you're planting, you've really, for best results, like these guys, big nurseries will actually take this seedling tray and they'll put it into 98% humidity, 20, 25 degrees, and it's up within a day or two. So the right conditions, don't seed into cold soils. They just will be slower to emerge, and if the seed is slower to emerge, you will not get the same total germination at the end of the day. So in nurseries, obviously you put vermiculite over the seed. It's easy to move through it. If you're in the soil, you want to either put vermiculite over the seed, or you put a blanket, a hessian sack or something, so that it's just insulated a bit more, and then you take it away as soon as it's emerged. Otherwise you'll end up with weak stems. But yeah, get good seed. If you don't start with the right foundation, right basis, you won't get a good plant. All right. The foundation of good growing is minerals, and there are 13 main ones. So the three majors are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. The secondary ones are calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and I've put in there chloride too, because chloride is really beneficial. I'll talk about that too. Trace elements are copper, zinc, iron, boron, manganese, boron, and I've actually added molybdenum in there. I use a lot more molybdenum than anyone else will, because it converts nitrates out of the plant, and I actually believe it stimulates the plant as well. And then we get rare earths, and they include cobalt, nickel, and there are others too. I've done a bit of work on silicon, so I'll talk about that. And so what does each do? The real challenge is that they work in combination with other minerals. I just wanted to put this slide up because for a number of years I've listened to this guy from the States. Guy John Kempf, he has a podcast, a website called Advancing Eco-Agriculture, and you can listen to this guy free. He's got lots of challenging information, but you can listen to a podcast. It's just invaluable information that comes up with insights into how to grow plants better and differently, and all sorts of clues. All right, as I said, the minerals work in combination with each other, but mineral nutrients have specific and essential functions in plant metabolism. Depending on how great the growth requirement, you can either call it a macronutrient or a micronutrient. Or based on physiochemical properties, you get the metals, and those are the metals, potassium being a very key one. They're all key. This is the point. You can't do one without having them in combination. Okay, so then you've got the non-metals, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, boron, and chloride. And each of these are very leachable. So they're the ones you've got to be looking to put in regularly. With nitrogen for organics, obviously you can put in slower release poultry manure pellets, for example. But yeah, the challenge is season to season, these are very leachable or usable, and you've got to be putting them back in especially. So a mineral nutrient can function as a constituent of an organic structure, as an activator of enzyme reactions, or as a charge and osmoregulation. And potassium is really, really key for that one. So what does each do? So I said before they work in combination. Okay, so there are three big ones: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And can you read that back there? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm really sorry. I thought I was. Yeah. So phosphorus is really important for strong roots, potassium for fruit and flower development, and nitrogen promotes lush growth. We know that. And then you get large leaves and thick stems. Nitrogen's essential for producing proteins and chlorophyll, and it's really important to give the plants the right amount. So if you've got nitrogen deficiency, obviously plants will be pale and yellow. They'll be stunted. Older leaves can be nice and green, but new leaves will be yellow. It's really important for chlorophyll. Okay, so if we don't address nitrogen, leaves will be stunted. Phosphorus. Okay, phosphorus gives plants energy. Without that energy, they'll have smaller leaves and they'll grow with less vigour so that you don't fill out the fruit. So in my role, I'm always trying to keep phosphorus going into the system right through the plant, right through the season, so that the fruit at the end will also be even just a couple of millimetres bigger. Phosphorus gives plants energy. And it's really important in the leaves, but also the roots, and the leaves will need that phosphorus first. So readily available nitrogen and phosphorus is really important for seedlings. Potassium. Okay, functions mainly in osmoregulation, maintaining electrochemical equilibria in cells and regulation of enzyme activities. All of the metals have some influence on osmoregulation in the plant because they are metals, okay, and so they give some charge to the plant system. Calcium is necessary for normal leaf development and accumulates in leaves and older parts. It's essential right through the plant. It becomes immobile, especially if you don't have good irrigation practices, and if you have too much high nitrate in the plant, you'll end up with blossom end rot, which is what you often see in tomatoes when they're trying to push a plant too much, especially in conventional. So out of the book I have Mineral Nutrition and Plant Diseases, page 81, this table was there, and they show that if you address these, in these crops, if you address calcium supply, and that was the calcium source used on the right-hand column, so you've got calcium sulfate, which is gypsum for eggplant, and you'll get less disease if you have adequate calcium sulfate. They showed that adding calcium sulfate actually reduced grey mould or botrytis, which is a common problem in a whole range of crops. Peanuts, for aflatoxin, you apply gypsum or calcium sulfate, you'll actually help against aflatoxin. So it's just really a mineral deficiency that's allowing the aflatoxin to be as it is. All right, so magnesium, really important in the leaf for chlorophyll. It's associated with rapid growth and cell division. Really important for high protein levels, carbohydrate metabolism, energy transfer reactions. It's highly mobile and the most easily diagnosed as deficient because it moves from the older growth to the new growth. That's the most common symptom. If you see old leaves going yellow, it's usually you think first of all of magnesium. Again, this table comes out of the same book, page 96, showing that soft rot, Erwinia soft rot in potatoes would decrease if you've got adequate magnesium. So magnesium is working in the plant to protect against a range of diseases, and this is specific research showing what diseases it helps against. All right, sulphur is really forgotten about in all the horticulture I've been involved in over 30 years. So we had, when I moved to the Granite Belt 18, 20 months ago, the key nutrients I identified as being really low in this area were sulphur, boron and magnesium. And so last season with vegetables that I was working with, I told a particular grower to put down 80 kilos of elemental sulphur per hectare. That would increase your soil sulphur by about 30 parts per million. And we saw in the first crop the plant had good sulphur, but because of the rainfall we were having, we could see clearly in the second crop that we were low in sulphur. So it really is key for a range of reasons. It's essential for protein formation. It's a constituent of amino acids. They're listed there. And deficiencies of which result in serious human malnutrition. So we're not talking just about growing the plant, we're talking about food as well. So the vitamins biotin, thiamine and B1 contain sulphur, and the structure of the proteins is determined considerably by the sulphur groups. If sulphur is deficient, plants are small and spindly. Younger leaves are light green to yellowish. The protein quality, especially methionine content, suffers, and maturity of fruit and seeds is delayed. All right, trace elements play a complex role in plant metabolism, and you've got here a list of what each of them does. So zinc is present in several dehydrogenase, proteinase and peptidase enzymes, promotes growth hormones and starch formation, it's for seed maturation and production. And you can see each of these, I've said they're low in granite belt soils. So iron is one metal, one trace nutrient I didn't pick up as being really low in these soils, but I'm really clear in that now, and we're putting on more iron in blends ready for this season. Okay, so iron participates in oxidation reduction reactions, nitrate and sulfate reduction. So if you reduce nitrates, your plants are usually less attractive to pests, especially aphids. Iron's important in chlorophyll formation, as is for good leaf colour, as is manganese. Copper is often, people get really concerned about copper levels in soils. If you don't have adequate copper in your head, you've got more chance of getting tumours and so on. Copper has a whole range of things that the body needs copper for. It's important in photosynthesis, protein and carbohydrate metabolism, and probably nitrogen fixation too. So manganese, I was just talking to a lady before we came in here, and she was in northern New South Wales previously. I saw a soil test about 15 years ago that showed that manganese was, the particular agronomist I was talking to said that this paddock was toxic. It had 300 parts per million manganese. Whereas soils around here generally will be less than 10. So completely, widely different because of the source that they come from. So manganese is important in photosynthesis, nitrogen metabolism, really important around flowering, before flowering and during flower set, and also for fruit quality. Boron is really important, facilitates sugar translocation. It's essential for water absorption and root growth, cell division and development. You won't get the same results from applications of calcium if you don't have adequate boron, because the two work in tandem in the plant to move through the plant. Molybdenum, I said before, I use a lot more than anyone else. So it's essential for nitrate conversion, reductase, for nitrogen fixation. And I'll normally spray molybdenum every 10 days on my veggies. So when I grew veggies, I always sprayed lettuce with molybdenum regularly, and I'd leave the others unsprayed. And if they're unsprayed, they'll be bitter. And that's why you've got so many lettuces in shops that are bitter. You won't enjoy them. They really need molybdenum. All right, cobalt. Often forgotten about, really important for legumes. It's not as important for most other crops, but it does help with root cap growth as well also. So I do have it in, like I'll put some on my veggie garden. You might put on a couple of 100 grams of, say, molybdenum over a crop. I'll put on, say, 50 grams of cobalt per hectare per year. That's about it. So it's not much. So nickel is the next one, has direct or indirect effects on microorganisms that incite certain diseases, including viruses, bacteria and fungi. It's considered a fungicide. High foliar copper levels limit uptake of nickel. So I was putting some nickel on some tomatoes last year, and I've read this recently, and I go, well, you have high copper levels on tomatoes, so we probably weren't getting a response from the copper being sprayed on as a foliar application. You'll add probably too much nickel to a soil if you're putting on lots of sewage sludge, so you've got to be aware where your nutrients are coming from. And chlorine or chloride, it's more than a micronutrient. It comes in with things like sodium chloride, obviously, calcium chloride, comes in manures, but just it increases soil conductivity. And if you don't have, it's the conductivity in the soil that gets plants sucking that nutrient through. So if you've got no conductivity in your soil, which you get from other nutrients as well, but chloride can really help to actually boost that so the plants will actually draw on it rather than just being water. I just wanted to put this slide in. So not all trees respond to nickel the way that pecans do, but this is a pecan tree about 5 weeks after bud break, and this left-hand side of the tree was sprayed with nickel at only 100 milligrams per litre, nickel concentration, but you can see the difference. They're really key. All right, so sodium is the only nutrient or salt that's not wanted, and it'll actually be detrimental, especially if your potassium's not adequate. So plants will preferentially take up potassium, but if there's not enough potassium, they'll start to take up sodium. So where does it come from? It comes from the soils, the parent rock. It also comes from bore water. On the north side of town, Applethorpe Way, each side of Old Warwick Road, the farms through there have a real challenge with sodium. And even after the high rainfalls we've had, we've still got high sodium in the water there. So it's a real challenge for hydroponics, and so we've got to work on that. So they feed sodium to animals in feedlots so as to get them to eat more and drink more. Sorry, it's in the feed, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, so then the sodium comes through in manures or in compost. And obviously rainwater, dam water is the better for getting rid of or minimising your sodium input. So silicon is the second most abundant element in the Earth's crust, generally an insoluble component of primary and secondary minerals. The form that it comes into the plant as is monosilicic acid or orthosilic acid. It improves the leaf angle to the sun, so you actually get better photosynthetic capacity in the plant because of the leaf angle being different. It's really important if you've got high nitrogen in dense plant stands, in cereals for example. And it will counteract a number of effects of other things in soil like sodium. It'll help with uptake of, especially of manganese, but aluminium, iron, manganese and phosphorus to increase the availability to plants. So I grew ginger in potting mix in bags on the Sunshine Coast before I moved down here. And I compared bags with and without agrosilica, which is a monosilicic acid. And so the reason I wanted to use this number one was because I put on a lot more trace elements than anyone else does. And I thought I've got to have some sort of buffer against the high rates of minerals that I was going to use. And so when I did this on the basis that the company that supplies the agrosilica would pay for some tests of the actual rhizome when I came to harvest. We got about a 12% increase in yield, but we got much better levels of all the nutrients, but especially manganese in the plant. And I brought that ginger down here, and I had it for a year, and it didn't go off. I'll show you a photo in a moment that shows ginger that I bought just a couple of weeks ago, and I cut it 3 days earlier than I took this slide, and you'll just see how it's actually shriveling after just a couple of weeks. And so I have no doubt about the quality of ginger when it's minerally complete, or any crop. Okay, so there's lots and lots of research on the benefit of silicon to the cereals, to grasses, sugarcane, rice and other cereals. I just mentioned about the ginger, but last season I had a cucumber grower down here who put it on some paddocks with his field cucumbers, and he said to me that he was confident he had at least a 20% increase in yield where we put down the agrosilica. And that surprised me, that number. So with the same grower, we put on agrosilica on some capsicums, and we tested the capsicum fruit. We didn't get any increase in mineral levels or silicon in the capsicum fruit. We didn't measure yield, so I just wanted to see whether we got better mineral density in the fruit. But we did. I did test tomatoes where we put it, and in the same variety side by side, and where we used it, we got higher levels of silica and other minerals in the tomato leaf. All right, so this is the ginger I just referred to. So I'd cut this, sorry, better use this, haven't I? So I'd cut that ginger just 3 days earlier, and you can see this cavitation in the top, how it's shriveled. That's after just 3 days of cutting it, and I never saw that in the other ginger that I'd brought from the Sunshine Coast where I grew with high minerals. All right, the really important part about this slide is that any nutrient will, if it's inadequate, will influence yield, and you'll have lower yield because that's the most restricting factor of the nutrient levels in the plant. So even nitrogen can cause yield loss, but every nutrient can cause yield loss if it's not adequate in the soil. All right, just before I get away from these slides about the benefits of nutrients, I want to talk about nutrients. Because they're metals, they're often fungicidal as well. But I want to start with sulfur. In mineral nutrition and plant diseases, you can see I've got you can see there I've got page 104. They talk about putting on sulfur in the form of sulfate to low sulfur fields. So they had inadequate sulfur in the paddocks, and they reduce stem canker of potato. That's pretty important by having adequate sulfur. Sulfur acidifies the soil, and so helps release other nutrients into the soil solution for better uptake and plant protection. It's a very leachable nutrient, second only to boron as far as how it leaches. So as I mentioned earlier, I would add each season, especially if you've got high rainfall, I'd add about 80 kilos of elemental sulphur per hectare. And under organic systems, you're allowed to put that in, but you have to put it into a compost first so it doesn't go directly onto the soil. Yeah, so I just mentioned that about adding to compost, and once again, it's very low. All right, so many trace elements have fungicidal benefits. Copper is well known, fungicidally and bactericidally. Zinc also, zinc compounds have broad application as fungicides and bactericides, and that's in that reference there, page 157 of Mineral Nutrition and Plant Diseases. So manganese also, see there, dithane or mancozeb, fungicide used in conventional farming, is actually a fusion of manganese, zinc and cobalt. And it works as a fungicide, is widely used. And again, that reference on nickel, Mineral Nutrition and Plant Diseases, page 225. Nickel has a direct effect on viruses, bacteria and fungi. So how do we determine whether nutrient levels in the soil are okay? So if you go back to the 50s, CSIRO and people like CFL, Consolidated Fertilisers, who became Incitec, they would go around different farms and they'd say, okay, well, their avocados are growing okay, we'll take a test there and that's what we need. And they'd go to other farms, they'd get an average. Is that good science? Well, I don't believe so. So I believe the best thing is you should be going back to where species originate to find out what soil mineral levels should be. And obviously, farming intensively for years, it's going to be a hard thing to find what those levels should be because they're probably depleted already. So, are averages of nutrient levels on farm the best approach? And my opinion is it's not, because the crop might look okay, but it won't perform to its optimum. I have no doubt about that. So this, I mentioned about the text that we had at uni. This one and being dumbed down. Well, this book here, the earlier edition, has this table in it. And you can see the levels of nutrient here. So the table is from here to there, those first 4 columns. And this level here, so I'll just read this one. Iron, this is the suggested analysis of a representative surface soil in totals, right? So if I have a level here of, so they've taken an average, 5,000 to 50,000 is the range, they say. Nothing like that in Australia. But say that they've suggested an average of 25,000 parts per million. So in the granite belt, we'd have maybe 70 in availables. So of that figure, that's probably about 20%. Normally availables are about 20% of the total, all right? So if we said, okay, that's 20%, our total then would be 350. So 350 versus 25,000 is the comparison really I'm making with this table. So with boron, okay, so they're suggesting an average, so this work, these authors are from the States. The States is a lot more fertile than Australia. And they're suggesting a surface soil. And a surface soil is normally 0 to 15 centimetres. So boron, they're suggesting 50 as a total. A friend who I've learned more about plant nutrition from than anyone else said to me there are places in California, and he's had lots of experience. I'm very confident he does know. And he says to me that there are places in California where that value will be 150. So on the granite belt, mostly we'll have about half a part per million. So even if you multiply that by 5, we might have 2.5 versus 50. So Australia is a trace mineral desert. There's no doubt about it. So what's the importance of having higher levels of nutrient in our soil? Obviously, if it's not in the soil, it can't get into the food. And I can confidently say that, so I grew organic mineral-enriched veggies about 15 years ago on the Sunshine Coast, and I put in really high levels of minerals over a 3.5-year period. I spent $12,000 on 1 acre in 3 years. And my wife had asthma all her life. Her asthma disappeared, and it's never come back nearly as badly. So it's only ever, and some friends said to us, oh yeah, but you're in your own business, as if you enjoyed it. Well, I'll guarantee you, my wife doesn't enjoy being in business for ourselves. So, yeah, but I'm very confident that, yeah, growing mineral-enriched veggies is the best way to get it into the body. Okay, next one. Okay, so all nutrients contribute to disease protection, including nitrogen. Yeah, because without optimum photosynthesis, you won't get the same structure of plant, and you'll get reduced growth, and they're more susceptible to disease. This bottom point here about optimum photosynthesis, the guy John Kempf I mentioned at the beginning from Advancing Eco-Agriculture, he made this point on a podcast one time that if you can get these elements adequate in the plant in the early stages, you'll actually get your plant up and away much quicker. So that's nitrogen, phosphorus, magnesium, manganese and iron, because they're really important for leaf colour. Sulphur is too, so you want some sulphur there, but he says those are really important. And then if the plant's performing at 60% of its capacity, he says that your plants will actually be putting out root exudates to feed the soil. And that's where you want to get to. All right, this graph is up there. If you've done anything much with soils, you'll have seen this graph for sure. So the really key point here is 6.5 is neutral, right? So that's the pH level at which most plants will do well at. And the reason is that you've got the major elements, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulphur, calcium, magnesium, most available. You see that bar's thicker there? So they're most available at that, as are the trace nutrients. So you're getting the best of both worlds by having that pH level for best availability of all those nutrients. And I found this table that simply shows that at pH 6.5 you get the best efficiency of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. At a pH of just 6, you're losing efficiency of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium still very available, but it's really key to have ideally pH 6.5. About 20 years ago I was working with an eco-fertiliser company and I met a guy from CSIRO South Australia, and he made this statement to me I've never forgotten. Soil microbes synthesise organic compounds to fix vitamins in food. And that's why I don't believe in hydroponic production, because you need this interaction to get vitamins in your food. You need the foundation of minerals, but you can get some real good benefits by having the right biology too. And that guy's name was Dr. Albert Rivera. So mineral nutrition is the foundation, but biology can move things to the next level. I have no doubt that God made each mineral complete and stable, and they are not just another mineral, but they work together in a very predetermined way in combination with other minerals. So it is complex, and it's the basis of science, that these things are reproducible and they'll do the same thing every time. I've played around the last couple of years with a biological product called Sable X. And I'll show you a photo in a moment that really convinced me how good Sable X is. And I've been using it on a range of tree crops this last year, as well as veggies. There's another one I've been playing around with called Microtech SP, and a food source called Microfeast. And so some people will say just put the biology in the soil, it'll be right. Other people say no, you want to add some food source first because you've got natural biology there and you get it working before you put in others. There's a combination there that, yeah, I'm still working on, as I will be for a while. So a lot of companies now have these species of bacteria, Bacillus ameloliquefaciens and Bacillus megaterium, and they'll actually, Bacillus megaterium will help dissolve phosphorus as well, but yeah, they'll help against diseases. And you've got streptomyces as well for disease. Okay, so I was mentioning just a moment ago, you've got specific biology, but you've also got food sources to actually support the system. All right, so this is garlic I grew last winter, and I said to an organic garlic grower friend, I said halfway, just after I'd only probably 6 weeks in, I said, you better put Sable X on. He didn't, and he had a lot of his garlic was like this stuff on the right. He didn't grow this year because he wasn't impressed, but I tried to tell him 2 months in, you better put on Sable X. And that's honestly the result I got, and after that I went, wow. So this is completely saleable, and that's really hard to sell. Yeah. So I really believe in Sable X. All right, this table here is just, because of this, in my role I have obviously people come to me and say, okay, what do we do to actually remineralise our soils? And so I've had a mix made up. I work in with a company from Victoria now called Hybrid Ag, and they made up this blend for me. It's based on peat moss or brown coal. And I just wanted to show analysis of a standard organic product, Organic Life, 3.6% nitrogen, 3.1 phosphorus, 4 potassium. But it's the trace minerals that I did this blend over here for. So we've called it Wiltshire Vine and Tree Crop Blend. So this fertiliser in the middle is called Agri Blue or Nitrofosca. It's the same thing, just a different name. And you'll see its emphasis is really on the levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, a little bit of sulphur, and hardly any trace nutrients. Well, you can see here, if I compare this blend I've just got done up, okay, this is 34,000 parts per million. It's 3.4% of zinc, and this is only 100 parts per million. The Organic Life product has 300 parts per million. So when I'm trying to build soil mineral levels so as to grow good food, I would put this one on for veggies, and then I'd use a nitrogen source, whether you want to choose organic or conventional, to actually boost that. Because it's really important with vegetables, especially, to get a frame up quickly. If you don't build a big frame, you don't get a big heart. So if you want a small lettuce, you got a small frame. Yeah, but that's where nitrogen comes in to give it a boost at the right time to get that frame up. So yeah, we've got this one available at Wiltshire & Co. And that's the easiest way to actually get things started and underway as far as remineralising your soil. Anyway, I can talk about that later. So I thought I should just have a rough recipe for what you do on the granite belt for getting a veggie garden going. So you can add nitrogen pre-crop as poultry manure pellets for slow, steady release of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. You can add nitrogen via liquid fertilisers in crop, but I always say spray regularly with molybdenum if you've got those other things done right. So if you haven't done those foundations right, you're not going to get the same response from molybdenum either. It's all building on certain foundations. All right, phosphorus comes from manures or guano pre-plant or in a liquid guano through the water in crop. Potassium, so a bit of writing here, but just stick with me if you don't mind. Potassium in manures is only about 2.5%. So you've got to put on a lot of manure to get enough potassium. Sulphate of potash is not a cheap product, but it's a major way of getting potassium in a lot of crops, and you put it on pre-plant. There is actually. I used to work for a company, Organic Crop Technics, and they've now got a soluble organic certified sulphate of potash. It's only come available last year, but you can top up if you need to that way through your drip. So virgin ground here will be as low as 20 to 40 parts per million potassium. We really want about 150, 180 parts. So to increase soil levels of potassium by 150, we'd need, get this number, about 800 kilos of sulphate of potash per hectare. And there's the analysis there. But it's not, you don't put it on all at once, you'd probably put on half of that, and then half 6 months later ideally. So at about $2,300 a tonne, sulphate of potash is not cheap, but there's no cheaper source if you're going to build that level up quickly. Okay, so you really need to address your calcium and magnesium levels in these soils. So to build both, I'd be starting with about, I've got the numbers here, 2 tonne of lime per hectare, it's 39% calcium carbonate, and that would raise your calcium level by about 320 parts per million. We then add Flinders dolomite, that's a good product, 17.5% calcium carbonate, 11% magnesium carbonate at 2 tonne per hectare. And that'll add 90 parts of magnesium per hectare. So we're just trying to get the right levels of calcium, magnesium, potassium before we start doing the other things. So that's what I'd be doing generally in my veggie garden. I'd grow with those rates for a year, and then I'd do a soil test. You can do a soil test before if you want to, but I've actually done those sort of things first, and then I do a soil test after 1 year, and then try and fine tune it a bit from there. All right. And just mentioning again, sulphur. So elemental sulfur is feed grade sulfur. It's not, there's a key part. It's key for soils, for animal nutrition. So I want to keep putting that in each year or crop by crop. All right, so if I look at trace element levels, so if you don't want to buy that blend from me that I showed you, then this is what I'd do instead. So these are roughly the rates. Zinc sulfate at 50 kilos per hectare or 5 grams per square metre. Copper sulfate at the same rate. And what they'll do is these are the levels of nutrient on a per hectare basis. They'll increase the soil nutrient levels by. So 50 kilos per hectare will lift your soil zinc levels by about 7 parts per million. Copper, 50 kilos by 5. Iron sulfate, 200 kilos per hectare, will only lift it by 15 parts per million because it's a lower percentage of iron. Manganese, not many people will talk these sort of levels of manganese, but I'll guarantee you that's very safe. So that will only increase your soil manganese level by 26 parts per million. So if you can find a soil that's rich, like northern New South Wales, 300 parts per million, I go, that's where I'm going to get my soil if I can. All right, so boron. There's a real challenge with boron because it's a soluble powder. I've got a granule that this company from Victoria bring in now from overseas called Acticol G. So it's a slow release boron product. There's another boron product on the market called Organibor, and I don't like it because it's got pretty high levels of arsenic in it. And I've had quite a talk with the company about it, but they're still selling a fair bit in Australia. So, yeah, I haven't been able to source, except through that company I mentioned, Hybrid Ag, that slow release boron product. And I'll do regular foliar molybdenum. The amount of molybdenum you need to put in the soil per hectare is pretty full on to actually get a response because the soil biology will use it up first. And so if you're doing anything, I'd just be spraying it regularly with sodium molybdate while you've got leaf on, obviously. And cobalt, as I mentioned, about 50 grams per hectare. Sorry, I'll just go back there. And agrosilica. So there's a vineyard local to this area who I got him to put on some agrosilica last year. He put on 250 kilos broadcast under his vines just pre-bud burst last year, and then again 2 months later, the same rate. And he said to me that even though we had a really wet autumn where he used the agrosilica, he got no berry splitting. Where he didn't use it, he got lots of berry splitting he didn't harvest. So agrosilica, I really believe, like I'll throw it on now on all my veggies just because I'm confident it will help nutrient uptake and I want nutrient-enriched veggies. When I grew organic mineral-enriched veggies myself, I worked back, and this is 15 years ago, but I worked out that it was costing me 18 cents more per head of broccoli compared to other organic growers with what they were doing. So it's $12,000 over 3 years. Sounds like a lot of money, and it was. But it's coming back into the food, but 18 cents a head of broccoli. And I go, well, okay, I send to market. If I'm just being compared to other organic growers, how do I get that other 18 cents a head more back? And that's the real issue. You don't, unless you've got analysis on your broccoli saying it's mineral enriched and no one will pay more, but the food value is in the food. Yeah. All right, so that's about me. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm just intrigued by the stuff about the iron levels.
Yep.
I mean, every time you get the big rain around here, every ditch you see iron skin on the water leaching out.
Yeah.
It just seems incompatible with this very low iron levels. I don't know what's going on here.
It's really hard for me to make comment because where is it and so on. I know there are places around the granite belt you get 60 parts per million of iron in the soil, but I see it in crops regularly that you get still not enough. So is it not available?
I don't know if it's just unavailable.
Yeah.
I mean, this is stuff that's obviously mobile.
Yeah.
Leaches through.
Yeah.
Ditches,
Yeah.
And you've got a little.
Yep.
I used to have a lot more than I do now.
Yeah.
Every time there was a big rain on the dam, there'd be
Yep.
a little film.
Yeah.
I mean, is that really unavailable?
Well, you can, again, it'll depend on what species, because species will pick up different nutrients.
Yeah.
I just know from through last season we're often getting low iron levels in crops. Yeah. Yeah, a whole lot of ways to answer that, sorry. Yeah, it's a fair comment.
Oh,
Yeah.
it just seems,
Yeah.
seems odd.
Yeah.
That,
So are you observing iron deficiency, or are you observing tannins or something else being leached?
This last autumn I was observing iron deficiency in crop. That was the first time.
Yeah, right.
I'd always assumed it was
Yeah,
pretty plentiful. And the soil tests I've had
yeah,
seem to indicate
yeah,
it's bad.
yeah.
But just the fact that there's
Yep.
mobile iron
Mm.
in the soil.
So you can be putting on iron sulfate in crop with most, in conventional crops we'll be putting on iron chelate, thing called iron EDDHA.
Yeah, you're right.
And that's, sorry?
I've got some of that since.
Yeah, yeah,
but only
yeah.
because
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. That's a good comment, thank you.
Before another question,
Yes.
just have an announcement.
Yes,
to make,
sure.
Before anybody moves. If anybody has lost a pair of keys, they've been found on the ground and they are at the Expo desk. So just check.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to simplify it a lot for me,
Yeah.
you are actually selling a mixture that you believe is right for growing veggies, because I'm a vegetable grower, I'm not a
Yep.
farmer.
Yep.
So you're actually saying there that you've got a product that I could come in and
Yeah.
try and apply.
That's right. That product I've got is 95% organic. It's actually got a little bit of MAP and a little bit of ammonium sulfate in it as well. I can get, if I see the demand for a fully organic blend with those same things, then I'll request that. But it's all about price, and some people don't want to pay that little bit extra or $10 a bag more, whatever it requires. Yeah.
And then on top of that, you would needing to do some foliar sprays.
Yeah, I'd be putting in a nitrogen source if you're doing veggies, because you need more nitrogen to grow that thing adequately. And that rate, the recommended rate I've got on that product is put on a tonne per hectare. I also say try some areas at 2 tonne per hectare, because I want to grow mineral enriched. I don't want to just put on a little bit. I want it to be up there so I can get it into the plant. So I'm playing about a bit with that. I've had some people buy it, and I'm just waiting on feedback, to see how it goes. I'm very confident that'll be very safe.
And sorry, what's it called again?
Wiltshire tree and vine crop blend. Yeah. Yes? Using soils in a hydroponic system? Right. How to get nutrient density into hydroponic? Yeah, right. I'd like to play in that space for a while too and work that out, but yeah. In hydroponics, no one's really doing soil. It's all either nutrient solution or coir blocks. Yeah, but you're talking soil hydroponics. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I would really question it. Yeah, like I've said there, I really try to use agrosilica as part of that to try and help that move up into the plant, and that's an organic product. Yeah. Are you talking organic or conventional soil grown? It'll be organic, I think. Is that what you... Sorry? Sorry? Are you talking organic hydroponic systems? Yeah. Yeah, I haven't really played in that space, so I can't really make too many comments. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
AEA
sorry.
have done an interesting study on plant nutrients and the increase in bricks levels
Right.
for pest control and
Yep.
pest resistance in plants. Have you done any work with your own vegetable gardens and these sort of things on the bricks levels in the leaf?
I haven't been measuring bricks, but I'm very confident with what I do that I'm getting... I say to the growers I work with, you'll get less insect attack with what we're doing. And so you'll spend less on chemicals. Yeah. Yeah, I hear those comments about bricks levels. I haven't really monitored that consistently to see. Yeah.
Because they were saying basically once you get to the bricks levels, above what the 12.1 I think
Yeah.
that was,
Yep.
that your pest resistance increases dramatically.
Yeah. I get compost from a guy out near Oakey. It comes in bulk loads and so on. And that guy has had some really good results with improving bricks levels in plants compared to other systems. And he and his daughter went into Woolies and Coles a while ago and got broccoli and a range of stuff, and the bricks levels were just ridiculously low. Yeah, really not good. I've got a friend who I worked with many years ago who is doing his masters on what higher rates of nitrogen do to broccoli, and like you've got, I better not mention farm names around here, but guys who put on a lot of nitrogen, and what it actually does is it actually depresses the levels of antioxidants in the broccoli. So you've got to really watch, ideally, if you want to grow good food, use nitrogen, but yeah, excess is always bad, and it just dilutes those antioxidants in the broccoli. Yeah. Sorry?
What is brick?
Brix. It's a sugar reading of, so it's the sugars in the plant. Yeah. They use it for testing sugar cane, but it's used in a whole range of crops. Yes, sorry? Yeah. I did organic veggie seedlings for a while, and my wife didn't really care for me doing that. But I can give you some guidance on that. But yeah, you've got to have really available phosphorus. Yeah. But you won't get a good mix. You've got to really make your own. Yeah. Yep. And I used to use some liquid nitrogen too to get the seedlings up and away quickly. Just helped have that readily available nitrogen. Yeah. Yes?
This Woolshire product you've got, do you stock that across the other CRT stores?
Not at the moment. Yeah. Just here because I'm sort of keeping an eye on it, and yeah. And you got to have, if you put it there, you got to have guys who know about what they're explaining and so on. Yeah. Yep. Yes.
In a smaller household-sized garden where you're looking more at metres squared,
Yeah.
how much agrosilica and your tree and vine blend would you use?
So I'd start off with the tree and vine blend at I'd honestly say 200 grams per square metre. That's 2 tonne per hectare. And then the agrosilica, just work it back to 600 kilos a hectare. But if you're doing it over the whole year, then probably put on half that each time and do it a couple of times. So 600 kilos per hectare. If you go too high a rate of agrosilica, it actually the silica starts to lock up in the plant and affect other things negatively. So the 600 kilos per hectare is a very safe rate. Yeah. All good. Okay, anybody? Yes. If you don't have the right levels of nutrient in the soil, you're saying?
Yeah, no, when you say spraying or using the copper and
Yes.
antifungal
Yep.
sprays,
Yep.
and then it drops in the soil, would it then kill funguses there too?
I think you've got a fair barrier in, when you do follow your sprays. Yeah, I don't... Okay, I went to a talk by a lady from the States years ago about sulphur being negative on soil fungi. Okay, high rates of sulphur. And I go, from my observation, there are more negatives of not putting it on than there are the other way. So I actually want good levels of sulphur to make other nutrients more available. And I would say the same with it's sort of the same argument. You may have heard people say superphosphate causes all these cancers, right? Have you heard that sort of comment? Okay, some people, have been saying that for years. Well, I say, okay, well, give me the whole picture. Have they been putting on trace nutrients that actually helps that phosphorus move through the plant, or have they just been putting on toxic levels of superphosphate? It's all about balance. So if you put on the other minerals, then I would say things are in better balance and you won't get those cancers. But cancers are caused by, I believe, by poor nutrition, contributing factor at least. And so that's why I want to put on all the nutrients. Someone got a question down there? Hello? All right. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you.